Hi, my name is Carlyn Harris. I was a circumnavigator scholar in 2016, and my topic was sociocultural influences on antibiotic consumption and resistance. So I was sponsored by Arizona State University, and it's the Arizona or Phoenix chapter of the Circumnavigators Club Foundation. So it's been a while now, but it was kind of a combination of all of the things I had studied in undergrad. So I was a microbiology major, but I was also a global health major. My microbiology work, I did a lot of lab work, wet lab work with MRSA, which is methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, so a very antibiotic resistant bacteria. And so I did a lot of lab work with that. But on my global health side of things, I did more work with um, sociocultural determinants of health. So I spent a summer in 2015 in Guatemala researching perspectives on maternal health care and ideal family size among Indigenous women in Guatemala. So when it came time for me to design my circumnavigator project, I worked very closely with my mentors, and we kind of came up with something that combined my interest in antibiotic resistance and my interest in social determinants of health and sociocultural determinants of health. And that's how we came up with this project. Antibiotics are basically that they are medicines that treat bacterial infections. So antibiotics specifically are for bacteria. There's a broader class called antimicrobials, which it can include antivirals, antifungal medications, and antibiotics, which treat specifically bacterial infections. There's a lot of different kinds of antibiotics, and they all work in different ways. But basically, throughout all of the mechanisms of action, the idea is just to kill the bacteria that's inside someone's body. So between their immune system and the medicine, they can eradicate the infection. The process for the circumnavigators scholarship at Arizona State University was through our national office of, or the Office of National Scholarship Advisement, or ONSA at ASU. They were incredible in kind of connecting me with this opportunity. I'd been in contact with their office before, as they knew I was interested in global health. And so they pushed me to apply for this award. And at first, I was very hesitant because at the time I like 19, 20 years old, and the prospect of traveling around the world on my own was pretty daunting. But they thought I would be a good candidate for this and pushed me to apply. And so the Office of National Scholarship Advisement at ASU was huge in me getting this award. There are many challenges I faced planning this trip. In the end, it turned out incredible. But in the beginning, because this is a very independent process, you do have mentors. I had a great mentor at Arizona State who helped me through the whole process. But in the planning stages, it's kind of on you to contact people in the countries you'll be going to. And so what I did basically was I just cold emailed faculty members at major universities or other organizations in all of the countries I plan to go to, and said, "Hi, my name, I'm Carlyn. I'm a student at ASU. This is my project idea. Do you think if I came to your institution over the summer, you would be able to help me with this project?" And a lot of people said yes and were very gracious. Some people obviously said no, but usually helped me along to find someone that could help me. So that was the one major obstacle. The other was logistics and kind of trying to fit in. I probably ended up taking 10 plus different flights with layovers, and determining the cost of that and trying to be very budget conscious while making sure I could get to everywhere I needed to go. So the planning stages were probably some of the most difficult. And then I also had to go through the IRB process, which is an ethics approval process for any time you're going to be doing research with human subjects. And that took itself about 4 or 5 months to complete. Luckily, I had the great support of my mentors at ASU, but the planning stage was tough. I chose Guatemala as my first trip on my circumnavigation because of my experience with it in 2015. So in 2015, after my sophomore year at ASU, as a part of the global health curriculum, we were required to do a global health field school. And so for us, that entailed working with a faculty member who was a medical and social anthropologist. His name is Dr. Jonathan Moffin, and he ended up being my thesis advisor. But we went to Guatemala into a rural town called Acatenango, and me and my fellow students were interviewers for this research project. And basically what we are looking at is how do people in the community view access to maternal health care, the quality of maternal health care in rural Guatemala. And I really enjoyed the interview aspect and qualitative research and really hearing people's stories and not just collecting numbers for data analysis. And so when it came time to design my project, I really wanted to have some component of an interview or a qualitative survey to understand what people thought about antibiotics and antibiotic resistance, just like we did with maternal health care in Guatemala, kind of to put it simply. And I also speak Spanish. It's been a while, but at the time I spoke pretty good Spanish and wanted to go to a Spanish-speaking country to continue my fluency. And that's also why I chose Spain to be the next location on my trip. So my trip in Guatemala in 2015 really kind of sparked my interest in global public health research. And then the circumnavigation I was able to kind of carry that out further. I chose Antigua as my first site in Guatemala. Antigua first of all, it's a beautiful city. It's one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to. And during 2015, we actually spent 2 weeks there before we did our experience in rural Guatemala. But I chose Antigua. First of all, I knew there would be, it's a pretty big population of people in Antigua, and I knew there would be plenty of people that would be willing to interview with me there. And also I had to take into account kind of safety considerations, being a single female on a world trip by myself. So there's a lot of beautiful parks in Antigua where families and people are all the time, and that gave me a good opportunity. Those were a lot of places where I would walk up to people and interview them. In my original study design, I wanted to have a good balance of countries that have a high GDP or higher income countries and countries with a lower GDP, lower income countries. And I also wanted a mix of countries that were nationally had a high antibiotic consumption, medium antibiotic consumption, and low antibiotic consumption, and kind of stratify through those different categories to get kind of the most diverse data I could. So Spain, it is a high income country, but they also have, I categorize it as a medium antibiotic consumption profile. And so I chose Spain again, because I do speak Spanish, and I was able to conduct the research with ease there, but also because it was different from Guatemala in that it is a higher income country, and it does have kind of a medium antibiotic consumption profile. The excursions I did was in Toledo, which is kind of one of the oldest cities in Spain, if I'm remembering correctly. It's been a while. I went to the Royal Palace of Madrid, which is where Spain's royal family is. And Madrid, actually, one of its most famous parks, Parque Retiro, is it's not only a tourist destination for me, it was also where I did all of my interviews as well, because people from all walks of life in Madrid go there. So as far as I remember, those were kind of my excursions in Spain. When I was originally designing this project, just as a disclaimer, I was a young researcher, and some of the methodology is not what I would choose now, but I chose the Netherlands because at the time, and I think this is still the case, is they had one of the lowest rates of antibiotic resistance in the world, the Netherlands and other Scandinavian countries. When I was researching where to go, this was one of the places that stuck out to me as, wow, it looks like this country, whatever they're doing in terms of antibiotic policy, is working because of their low rates of antibiotic resistance, and also their overall antibiotic consumption per capita was also pretty low. And so that's why I wanted to go and interview people there to see kind of from an individual perspective, from an everyday person, like what are their thoughts on antibiotic consumption and resistance. So I chose Netherlands as kind of a representation of the Scandinavian countries that all have, at least it seems like they're doing a good job in terms of antibiotic resistance. So my next stop was India. And the reason I chose that is at the time, and I think again now still, I don't remember all of the statistics a couple years later. However, I chose India as a stop because it was known to be a country that had a lot of antibiotic resistance and also a lot of heavy antibiotic prescribing and consumption. For example, in India, and actually in Guatemala as well, a lot of times you could just walk into a pharmacy and ask for antibiotics without a prescription. And so I was looking for that perspective, kind of what individuals thought about that. Did they personally expect, like, if I had questions like, if you were sick and you thought you needed antibiotic, what would you do? And it varied from country to country, but a lot of people in India would say, I would just go to my pharmacy because that's what they do in India. And so I was interested from that perspective, what people at an individual level thought about that. And in countries like India, in a way, it's easier. If people feel like they're sick and they want to get an antibiotic, they can go to their pharmacy and say, hey, this is kind of what I want. And then they can buy it. It saves a lot of money. It saves a lot of time. And India is not the only country that is like that, but it does, I think it's a convenience factor as well. But the downside to that is we see globally, those are some places that have higher rates of antibiotic resistance because antibiotics are so easily accessible. Yeah, so when I was in India, I had the opportunity to go to the Taj Mahal in Agra. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I think one of the most striking tourist destinations I've ever been to. It was about a 2.5 hour ride from my hostel in Delhi. And I remember when I first saw it, I thought it really looked like a green screen. It was just so strikingly beautiful. And I was like, there's no way I'm standing in front of the Taj Mahal right now. And I got to go with a lot of really fun people from my hostel who were from all around the world. And you see these things on postcards and pictures on the internet, but when you're standing in front of these like mass, like beautiful architectural feats, it's almost unbelievable. So in South Africa was a lower income country, and they kind of also had a medium to high antibiotic consumption profile. I also chose South Africa because I had never been to Africa before, and I heard a lot of amazing things about the infectious disease faculty in Cape Town. The University of Cape Town has some of the most amazing infectious disease faculty in the world, and I wanted a chance to get to know them and get their perspective on all of this as well. And my last stop was Auckland, New Zealand. They are, New Zealand is a high income country, and they also have a pretty good, antibiotic stewardship programs, meaning they do a good job at kind of driving down antibiotic consumption when it's unnecessary, and thereby, decreasing antibiotic resistance. And so obviously there's a lot of countries that fit these profiles. And so after I kind of categorized them into where I wanted to get my data from, I also picked countries that I just wanted to go to and wanted to see, countries that had a lot to offer. And New Zealand was amazing. It was beautiful. So green, rolling hills, a lot of incredible people as well. Some of the nicest people I've ever met. End of the trip, I did bungee jump off the Auckland Bridge. I thought at that point, traveling around the world by myself to 6 countries in 3 months, I thought, you know what, that's probably one of the scariest things. I took that jump. I should be able to do anything. Like the stuff I had done the whole summer before, um, just like walking up to random strangers in countries I've never been to, that was scary in and of itself. And I never thought I would want to be like, I would want to bungee jump. I'm afraid of that kind of thing. But when I saw that there was like a bungee jump, a couple minutes from my hotel, I was like, you know what? Why not? Screw it. I'm just gonna do it. And I did, and it was terrifying, but it was also so fun, exhilarating. My mom and sister actually visited me for 1 week at the very end in Auckland, and I told them like, "Hey, I'm just gonna go bungee jump. I'll be back by noon." And they're like, "Are you sure? Like, are you okay?" And I was like, "I've done a lot of stuff this summer. I think that this is gonna be the least of my worries." So bungee jumping was honestly, it was a very poetic end to that whole summer as well. So in South Africa, I met up with Tara, and it's such an incredible camaraderie. There's only that summer there was only 3 people in the world doing what you're doing, and there's no way to describe it to other people, even family and close friends. You can tell them all about your experience, but until you are the one going around the world by yourself in like 6 countries in 3 months, being able to have someone to talk to about that and kind of share stories and share our highs and lows about the trip was probably another one of the most special parts of my time as well. In Auckland, New Zealand, I met up with Ryan. I believe he went to Georgetown. I was very lucky to get to meet up with both of them. I think I was the only one that got that experience. I got some great advice from the Circumnavigators Club Foundation before I left that yes, this is primarily a research project and something that you do for your career development, but this is also going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity and you should have fun while you're there. And so in each country, I did my best to find at least a couple of days to do some more tourist fun things. Presenting my circumnavigation to the Circumnavigators Club back in Arizona was such a privilege to stand in front of the people who had made this entire trip possible and get to show them, this is what I did, and you were the reason that this happened, was very special. So I presented not only kind of my research findings, but I also got to show them a lot of pictures from my trip, told them all my stories about, fun things I did. Like not only did I bungee jump in New Zealand, but right before that in South Africa, I did great white shark cage diving. It was like face to face with a great white shark. And so being able to show them, I really took this experience, I gave it all I had, and I got all out of it that I possibly could, was really special. And I think that it seemed like everyone was very grateful to hear that from me, because that's what the Circumnavigators grant is all about, is giving people like me the opportunity to have an amazing career development opportunity, but also it was such a time of personal growth. As someone who was 20 years old, I had traveled before, but not by myself, and it made me mature very quickly. And so it was great to be able to come back kind of a changed person and thank them for what they had done for me. I think the major takeaways from my research were, antibiotic resistance is a global problem and is going to require global solutions. However, it's also important to realize that every individual country and individual context is going to require different strategies to curb antibiotic consumption and resistance. Part of the goal of my research was to kind of just point out that every community individuals have a different understanding of what antibiotics are, what they're used for, and every community has a different understanding of what antibiotic resistance is and what that means for their lives. And so pointing that out is important because it kind of makes public health researchers and policymakers aware of the fact that there's no one size fits all strategy to solve the problem of antibiotic resistance. And people, have been doing research on this for kind of decades now, but realizing that if you're, for example, going to have an education campaign about antibiotics and antibiotic resistance, you first need to do kind of an extensive assessment of the community's needs, and kind of first assess what is their knowledge level of antibiotic consumption and antibiotic resistance, so you can tailor specific education programs to specific communities. An antibiotic education program that is like designed for the United States or even state by state would not translate to Guatemala or anywhere in Europe or India. So every country and even individual communities, researchers and policymakers need to take that into account. The circumnavigators trip definitely made me a better researcher in many ways. I think so. It was my first kind of solo individual project that I ever did. And the methodology it's not great. It was an amazing introduction for me to the world of global public health and antibiotic resistance research, but it made me a better researcher in the fact that you have to really start narrow when it comes to public health research. When I wrote my thesis on this work, I was kind of, I had, for example, I only did about I want to say 100 or so interviews in each location, maybe a bit less than that. But in my thesis, I kind of extrapolated that to say like, oh, people in India think this, when I only interviewed, in the grand scheme of things, a country of over 1 billion people, 100 of them. And to say, you can't extrapolate data from this small amount of people to a whole country, obviously. And so kind of it made me a better researcher in that way, to realize you really need to hone your methodology to what you're looking at. And I think the circumnavigation was a great experience for me to get my feet wet in how to design interviews and how to conduct them and how to analyze them. And so the circumnavigators trip also showed me I was my first introduction to data analysis. And so I by myself, I kind of entered all of my data into an Excel spreadsheet, and then used one of our public health softwares called SPSS to analyze these surveys. And so it made me a better researcher in that way. It was my first introduction to quantitatively analyzing surveys and drawing conclusions from them. And, as a junior and senior in college, I hadn't done that up until that point. And now I've done that many times and have been able to publish some research studies since that time. That final year at Arizona State, my senior year, after I came back from my circumnavigation, I felt amazing. I felt so free in a personal perspective, but I realized I had gone through my entire career at Arizona State as a pre-med, and how it works and for medical school is you usually apply to medical school to go right away from college into medical school. And I realized, when I came back, I didn't want to do that. I needed more time to explore the world. I wanted more time to kind of parse out what exactly I wanted my career to be before I got into medical school, because I know it would be a hard road once I got there. And so I wanted to have more global health experience. And so I applied for a master's of public health at the University of Edinburgh. And I actually, in large part thanks to the circumnavigators grant also received the Rotary Global Grant Scholarship, which is a scholarship from Rotary International to help students from the US study abroad for graduate degrees. And so I was able to win that, and I think in huge part because of my experience with the Circumnavigators Club. So that was kind of what my whole senior year was focused on. I kind of wrote up the findings of my research from my circumnavigation, but I was also applying to Masters of Public Health programs and these other large scholarship programs like the Rotary Scholarship, because I knew for me, going to medical school right away just was not going to be for me. And so a lot of my senior year was focused on basically, how do I leave the country again? Because I had such a good time doing it. And it worked out. So after college, like I said, I did my MPH at the University of Edinburgh, but then I was really fortunate to also be named a Fulbright scholar. And so I did my Fulbright year in Panama City, Panama at the Gorgas Memorial Institute, which is one of the premier infectious disease research institutes in Latin America. And one of their centers deals with hantavirus research. And so I kind of designed not a similar study to the Circumnavigator project, but kind of similar in that it focused around sociocultural determinants of health. And so my work in Panama revolved around sociocultural determinants of prevention practices of hantavirus. And hantavirus it's a viral illness that's spread actually by mouse droppings. And how people kind of get it is if a mouse, goes to the bathroom in their house and they don't really see it. And then later on, they kind of sweep up those particles from the mouse feces and urine can get into the air and they can inhale them. And that is a way that people get infected with hantavirus. And so the focus of my research was to understand what people understood about the prevention practices, like how they could avoid rats getting into their house in the first place, but also how they felt about the role of the government or their kind of local institutions in helping curb the spread of hantavirus. So it was similar in that I did a lot of survey studies in a survey analysis, but it was a much more refined project than my Circumnavigators project because of all I had learned from my Circumnavigator experience. After I left Panama, I started medical school at Emory University School of Medicine here in Atlanta, Georgia. And the reason I wanted to come to Emory is because of, they're one of the best, known public health institutes in the world. Atlanta is known as the public health capital of the world because the CDC is here. The CDC is 10 minutes from my house, right across the street from Emory. And I knew if I wanted to have a career in public health research, that this would be the place to come. And I was never expecting to get into Emory, but I think they kind of saw in me someone who was interested in public health and infectious disease right off the bat. I already had career goals because of all my experiences. And actually at my interview, I was asked specifically about the Circumnavigators experience. And I think that showed them I was serious about this field and I had already had accomplishments in it. So I think it was a huge role in me getting accepted to Emory. I would say that throughout that summer, I learned more about myself and who I was than I actually learned about my research topic, I think. And I think that's a huge point of the Circumnavigators Club Foundation. That's what they want young people to go out and explore the world and help that change them. I think that as a student at Arizona State, I was very focused on, being a pre-med, getting into medical school. And that trip made me realize that from a professional standpoint, that's not all there is. And it made me realize, I really want to explore the world of public health more before I go into medical school. and it kind of influenced me to do a master's of public health in Scotland, and then I did a research year in Panama before finally coming to medical school. And then on a personal level, I think that it took away a lot of fear I had. I think as a young student, going into medicine, there was a lot of pressure. You're always pressured to just get straight A's, work as hard as you can. There's a lot of anxiety that comes with that. Um, and so having that summer to explore the world and meet so many different people took away a lot of my fear, and a lot of anxiety I had about, getting into the perfect medical school or kind of being the perfect student. All of that kind of fell away when I realized, okay, now I have my place in the world. I realize, what do I want to do with my life and how I want to improve the lives of others. And that's kind of the biggest change it had for me. I went from like a very hyper focused pre-medical student to somebody that wasn't really afraid anymore of what was out there. And also it made me, I wrote a blog when I was in doing my circumnavigation called Caught the Travel Bug. And I really did. And now, even though we're in a pandemic right now, I can't wait till the next time I get to travel around the world. Right now, I'm a third year medical student. And when I graduate, and either in 2023 or 2024, I might be taking an additional research year in Latin America. However, when I graduate, my goal is to be an infectious disease physician. But not only that, not only will I want to do clinical work in my future practice, I want to focus a lot on pandemic response and public health research. Even in the midst of COVID, I still want to work in pandemic research and pandemic control, because COVID-19 is not our last pandemic. I hope in my lifetime it's kind of our last major one, but this kind of COVID-19 has shown us that the global health is really global, and there's kind of a saying in global health that an infectious threat anywhere is an infectious threat everywhere, any kind of threat, because we're so globally connected. And so in my future career, I hope to kind of be able to help coordinate multinational research partnerships to fight against pandemics, and hopefully do some work maybe with the World Health Organization. I think right now they're doing an amazing job at trying to coordinate these multinational research partnerships between high income countries and lower income countries, and giving resources where they're needed. And I hope to be a part of that someday. I think the biggest life lesson I took away from this experience is kind of let go and don't be afraid. If I had to distill it into a couple of words, that would be it, because the world is an incredible and welcoming place. And I think when you're young and you watch the news of all, these scary things that go on, or listen to your parents saying like, oh, you can't go to that country, it's dangerous. It's when you actually go places and you explore the world, you realize there's not as much to be afraid of as there is to kind of relish in. I had the most amazing time in my life. So if I had to distill it into very simple terms, it would be to let go and don't be afraid. So if I was speaking to someone and I had to give advice to someone who's applying right now to the Circumnavigators grant, I would tell them that the first big step is to find a mentor at your home university. So when I found Dr. Jonathan Maupin at Arizona State, he was someone I went to Guatemala with and had a good relationship with. And so if you have an idea for a project, you need to kind of flesh it out a little bit with an expert in your field. That's the number one thing. And I spent a lot of time in his office saying, these are my ideas, these are my interests, this is my rough methodology. How do I fine tune it, and how do I make this into an actual scholarly project? And so that's the first step, is to talk to someone at your university. Once you have a project down, with your mentor, that's when you can start contacting people in all of the countries that you want to go to. And there's two major ways to do that. The first way is what I did, and kind of cold email people whose work um, really resonates with your project and who you think could add a lot to your project. And the second way, and probably the easier way, is if your mentor who you identify at your university has global connections, that could, one, influence where you're going for your project if they already have established relationships in certain countries. But two, it kind of also gives you a little bit more rapport if your mentor is saying, hey, I have this student who's interested in doing these projects. Would you be willing to mentor them for, 2 weeks or so, or however long you're going to be in that country? So those are the two first steps, is to find a mentor and then have your mentor help you find people around the world, or cold email them yourself. And then three, if you have a national Office of National Scholarship Advisement like we have at ASU, really utilize them. A lot of times they have amazing resources for, especially with writing the application. I got a lot of incredible edits on mine. The office kind of, I don't want to say they tore it apart, but they gave me a lot of edits that in the end made my application shine. And so really keep in contact with those people at all times. And I think with those kind of three key steps, you can have a successful application. I think one really important thing there are a couple of things, but one important thing for young researchers to know is, for example, when I was in India, I obviously I don't speak Hindi. And so I was able to use some of my circumnavigator funds to hire a local graduate student there to interpret my interviews with me. And she was not only an amazing interpreter, but she also was she became like one of my best friends in India. And what I think is important for young researchers to know is, if you're going into a country where you don't know much about the culture or the language, it's so important to have somebody to kind of guide you there. I think one big problem, especially in public health research, is kind of people from, higher income countries like the United States going into lower income countries and collecting data and leaving, and just kind of, it's more of something for kind of more of a selfish process. But I think if you are able to include people from the country you're going to and have a much better understanding of their life experience, and not expect to kind of understand an entire culture in 2 weeks, having somebody from that country who has lived their whole lives there is truly going to be your expert on that. And so that's something I would encourage all young researchers to think about from a logistics standpoint as well. And then I did take a lot of flights, probably 10 to 15 flights, and some of the layovers were kind of, could be upwards of 15 hours. And so one thing I do recommend is, if you ever find yourself in a 15-hour layover, I would just splurge on the $50 and get the airport lounge, because that was a big reprieve for me. And when I was traveling, I had a layover in Doha, and I was traveling to South Africa, and I had about 15 hours in between, and I was already exhausted. And so I said, you know what, I have it in the budget. I'm going to spend $50 and have a place to sleep and shower and eat. So that is another kind of pro tip from a logistics standpoint, if anyone finds themselves in this situation. Yeah. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that you will never have. If you are in any way interested in research that affects, research that can affect things on a global scale, this is for you. And if you are wondering, what can this do for me, I would tell them, it is the opportunity for you to take a research topic that you love and create it into something that may impact may impact your life forever in terms of career development, but also it might impact kind of the understanding around the world of what you're researching. The scholarship changed the trajectory of my life like forever. If I didn't have this experience, I don't know that I would kind of be so interested in global public health and infectious disease. And ever since then, all of my research and all of my kind of career goals have been focused on that. And I've been able to make a lot of amazing connections in the world of global health and infectious disease because of it. So to be a part of this 50th anniversary celebration it's such a privilege, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who's ever been involved, who kept this scholarship going, because you've really changed my life, and I know you have changed the lives of many other students.